Hearty good morning to you. Thank you guys so much for your dedication to the practice. I was a couple of weeks ago. I don't know how the weather is there in Omaha, but a couple of weeks ago here in Iowa, I was able to walk out on the Skunk River, which is because it was iced over. It was very thick ice, and it looked like people had put their ATVs on the ice even. That was so thick. The Skunk River is a tributary of the Des Moines River, I believe, if I have my geography correct. But this past week, it was amazing. I was down at the Skunk River again. I've been making it a practice to jog a couple of times a week, and these huge chunks of ice had dismantled and were coming down the river. I mean, just massive, and they were coming down at quite a speed. It was just a sight to see. But within a few hours, it had all gone. And it was just, I was kind of aware I was witnessing something that uh, was quite clearly impermanence. I don't know if that happens in Omaha, if the weather allows it. And I have to admit my ignorance around how the Missouri River behaves in the wintertime, if it even ices over, if it gets cold enough for the Missouri to ice. But so I like to start out. I do want to talk a little bit about mythology, and I want to start us out though by thinking about gravity and thinking about how gravity works in relation to how we sit on our cushions or in our seat. It's just kind of practical stuff here. So one of the questions we could ask ourselves when we approach our seat is, where is the center of our gravity? Where's the center of gravity for us in our body? Where's it situated in our body? We may be used to thinking about the center of gravity in terms of external objects, but with Zazen, we're looking at the center of gravity within ourselves. We're trying to get a sense or a feel for where gravity exists in our own body. And I don't know about you, but for me, and I think for maybe for some people when they start Zazen, for me especially, the center of gravity for me was up here in my head. And I don't know if you know anything. I'm just learning about center of gravity stuff, but if the center of gravity is up here, it makes us kind of top heavy. And so on a physical level, when we're top heavy, what happens physically is we fall over if we get struck by something that's lower than our center of gravity, or it's just a very unbalanced. Emotionally, I've come to equate a high center of gravity with anxious thinking or with anxiety, the emotion of anxiety. There's a high center of gravity. And understandably, if you have a high center of gravity and you're walking on a balancing beam and you're high up, that's going to create some anxiety because you're not stable. But it's just as true in our daily working and walking lives as well. It's worthwhile. We're not walking on balancing beams, but in a very real sense, we have to keep in mind that center of gravity as we move about our business because that will affect our emotional state as well. So just as you're sitting here, maybe see if you can locate predominantly where your center of gravity is. And one way to do that is to think about, where you place your attention. And like I said, when I first started practicing, my attention was all in my head. And so that's, where we place our attention is where the center of gravity lies. Now, with Zazen, what we're doing, here's how we can shift that. If you find your center of gravity all the way up here, we can shift that by bringing our attention down into what's called the hara, just a little bit above the navel. right? Just kind of bringing our awareness down, down, down into just above the navel. There's just I'm sorry, just below the navel. It says the tradition says 2 finger widths below the navel. But in any case, we don't have to get too caught up in the specifics of this. But bringing your awareness down into the abdomen. Let's just keep it there. Bringing our awareness down into the abdomen, right? Finding, see if you can feel the center. It's not something we intellectually do. It's something that we feel with our body, right? And it depends on also how we're comporting ourselves. So how is your back, right? Lengthening, making the back upright, tall, lengthening it, right? And just as I'm speaking, you can, do this within your own body and see if you notice shifts or changes. Where are your shoulders in relationship to your ears? And one of the things that all of us have trouble with in our society because of the way that we sit in chairs is bringing our shoulders back and down. We have trouble having our shoulders sitting properly in the shoulder girdle. So oftentimes our shoulder blades are popping up out of our back, and it's changing the center of gravity. So I want to invite you to kind of see if you can bring your elbows behind your shoulders. You can lift your hands up around ear height or so, and bring your elbow, open up your rib cage so that your shoulder blades are actually set in your back. And then from here, lengthening, check that you have decent mobility in your neck and turn your head. Sometimes when we have a stiff neck, it's partly due to where our shoulders are laying. So having the shoulder blades in the back helps us to turn the head get the full range of motion out of your head and out of the neck muscles there. All right, and then with the hands here, then we externally rotate the shoulders as we place the hands in lap. Externally rotating the shoulders. That keeps the shoulder blades in the back. And then see where's your attention now? Where do you feel it? Can you feel your sit bones? Whether you're sitting on a chair or sitting on a cushion, doesn't matter. Can you feel your sit bones? Right? Bringing the awareness down into the center of the body. And in the Asian philosophy, there's this idea that mind actually doesn't actually sit up here in the head and the brain, but down in the abdomen. Whether that's true or not isn't so important, but the idea is that it can help us to maybe reprioritize where we put our attention. And if you study any martial arts or any like Tai Chi or things like that, the awareness is to come down into the center of the body, right? And that's where we want to place the center of gravity. That keeps us stable, the body, the posture stable. And of course, it has a reverberating effect on the mind. It keeps keeping the mind centered, keeping the mind from anxious thinking. All right. So anyways, just a little preliminary here to think about with Zazen. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay, if I can get the ability to share my screen, and I want to share some slides. Do some entertaining with slides this morning.
Go for it.
All right. Great. Thank you. All right. So this is something I've been wanting to talk about the past several times I've offered a Dharma talk, and it's too big of a subject, and I don't even know if I'll do it. I probably won't do it justice even with the short time we have here. So if there's questions afterwards, that's fine. If I don't get to finish it, that's fine. But we'll go as far as I can. I want to keep with the time. We have until, how long we've got?
30, 40 minutes.
Okay, 30, 40 minutes. All right, I got my clock here, so I'm going to keep my eye on that so we stay on time. Okay, so this statement I I shared with you all a few weeks ago, and I didn't really elaborate it at all. We live between stories. We live between stories or between mythologies. Now, this particular statement that I'm making, we live between stories, actually is what I remember hearing Thomas Berry, the theologian, talk about Thomas Berry. I'm just curious, has anybody heard of the name Thomas Berry, or raise
Mm-mm.
your hand? Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. So, uh, Thomas Berry worked very closely. I mean, he's done a lot of stuff. He's passed away now, but he worked very closely with a cosmologist named Brian Swim. Anybody heard of his name? You have? Okay. Jenny has. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So just an amazing pair the two have been, and they've written stuff together on the scientific outlook of the way the universe is. And Thomas Berry is a theologian by training. So, anyways, he makes this kind of a bold statement that we live between stories. So, what does he mean? What does he mean, or what is the role of story or myth in human society? Because all religions have some kind of mythology. Buddhism is no exception to that. Zen is replete with Zen stories. I mean, if you study koans, those are stories, right? And story enables us it invites us into a particular scenario. That somehow we're hardwired to enter into story time, and it's at a very, very young age. I mean, babies even like to be told. They enjoy being read to, for example. They want to hear you speak to them and give them a story. And there's a pacifying effect to the story because, for one thing, it it also has a ground. Mythology can have a grounding effect. It can allow us to get a sense of who we are, why we're here, and where we are. This has been the traditional function of mythology. Um, so to say that we live between stories is to acknowledge the role that story has played in our civilization. And with Western civilization, okay, with Western civilization, it has to do with our creation story, right? What was our creation myth? And maybe I don't need to go into too much detail on this, but maybe I do. Um, but basically, there is a creation story that is central or integral to Western civilization, and that is the creation story, or I should say, there's two stories. Those of you who know your Bible know maybe more about this, but there's two stories of creation found in the Bible. And without going into any details about the kind of meanings behind these stories, most of us don't have any clue what the story is about, or we have some really rough idea of what it is, and we kind of circle around this idea of the world being created in 6 days and seventh day being a day of rest. And that might be where we end our investigation of the story. We might know that, say, God created this, God created that, God created the other thing. And that might be the extent of our understanding of the story. And most of us, a majority of us, whether we accept the story or reject the story, see it literally. If we see it, if we accept the story on a literal ground, I'm not saying that most of you, I'm just saying that most of us as a society, we don't know how to read or understand mythology because what we do is we take it oftentimes to be literally true. That's our problem, is that we take story, we take mythology we look at it through a literal lens. And we're often dismissive, or we're not even aware that there are symbolic meanings embedded in the story, or that there may be meanings that are hidden in the story. So that's why I say, if we consider ourselves religious, I don't mean necessarily Buddhist, but if we consider ourselves religious, sometimes we'll take the Bible literally. We have a lot of folks that in our society that may take the Bible literally, and if what the Bible literally says actually happened. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that that's how some people think, and that that's a really rudimentary way of understanding the Bible. But we haven't really, you know, and then the other side of that, which is just as bad in my view, is that we completely reject these stories because we take them literally. We don't see them symbolically. We completely reject them because we take them literally. So one group of people completely accepts it as literal and says there's a literal truth here. The other group of people uh, also accepts it as literal but rejects it because it doesn't make sense with regards to what we understand through science. Right? Both of these views are not helpful, because neither one is able to dive underneath the symbolic meaning of the stories. So getting back to this question of like, what does it mean to live between stories? We're presently in this space in our society where we're in between stories. Now, if we see mythology in this light, mythology as something that grounds us, right? Mythology as something that gives us a sense of purpose. Like you enter into the story and see, oh, now I understand why I'm here and what I'm about, what I'm doing here, and where I'm from. Now I understand all of these things, right? That's what the purpose of mythology. And Buddhism and the Zen tradition also has its mythology. We can trace, there's not just one mythology. And that's again, opening our minds to the non-literary, to the non-literal nature of myth. There are many. There's a multitude of stories within Buddhism that might connect us with mythology. But I would invite us to think about the transmission of light stories that's found in the book of the called the Denko Roku, the transmission of light, the records of the transmission of light. These are the transmission of the Dharma from teacher to student down through the ages up to the present time. And it begins with the Buddha, but actually it goes, you say, to the seven Buddhas before Buddha. And if we were to read some of these enlightenment stories, which we on occasion do, we can find a sense of like they're there to invite us in to a story between a teacher and a student. And we can take the place of the student, we can take the place of the teacher, and we can go back and forth there and discover by entering into the story what is, we might catch some glimpse of this transmission, this spark of enlightenment, this spark of wonder, right? Here's the highlight of the story. The highlight of the story is to bring us into a sense of awe, to bring us into a sense of awe of place and who we are, right? And a story that is successful at doing that, a story that can bring us to awe is successful. Let's say it like that. A story that is successful is one that can bring us to the brink of awe and mystery and kind of leave us there with our mouth agape. Um, and uh, and so we're right to evaluate a story. it's totally in our right to evaluate a story and be like, yeah, that story really was awesome. Now I feel a sense of belonging, I feel a sense of place. Or the other side is that we can say, this story really sucked and it, it didn't really speak to me, right? So we are constantly evaluating stories. And we live in this time right now where we're in between stories, where the guiding story, this this guiding story found in the book of Genesis, doesn't actually guide us. And on the other side, and it's been kind of thrown into the literalness of the story anyway, has been thrown into question by the reality of the investigations of scientists over the past 400 years, the 17th century, beginning in the 17th century, right? We've been prior to the 17th, 16th century, prior to this time, the scientific way of understanding the world wasn't developed to the extent it has been in the modern period, right? By that I mean the the relentless pursuit of empirical data, right? By empirical, I mean known through our senses, observation of the world through our senses or through extensions of our senses like the microscope or the telescope, right? Observations of the universe hadn't been detailed on a sensory level to that degree prior to around the 16th century. Now, that's not to say that intuitive knowledge didn't play a strong role in helping us to get a grip of what the universe is and where we are. And certainly the Zen tradition has a strong component of intuitive knowledge, intuitive wisdom to it, as do other religious traditions. So it's not like we're somehow unique and blessed, but a lot of the religious traditions have within them a really deep intuitive, or you could say mystical element to them also. Mystical is having this kind of a mystical experience where intuitively you feel wholeness, you feel oneness with the universe, you feel a sense of place, of purpose. And so those mystical experiences, mythology is often born out of a mystical experience. Religions are often born out of some kind of mystical experience or experiences. And and the mythology puts those experiences to words. Mythology puts the mystical experience into words because our minds can't grasp somebody else's mystical experience, but we can enter into a story much more easily than we can to somebody's mystical experience. We can enter into a story much more easily. All right. So mythology gives us a sense of place, and it can potentially awaken in us uh, a deep sense of belonging. So the mythology that is uh, beginning to awaken in modern consciousness is a mythology that comes out of this empirical tradition. By empirical, I mean using our senses to observe reality. And so we've got this other story beginning to emerge. We have this other story beginning to emerge that we can't quite get our minds wrapped around because we're not used to, at least in the West. Now, the Asian traditions are better at this, especially Buddhism and Hinduism, much better at this. But in the West, we're not used to grasping such immense periods of time that we're coming to understand as has preceded humanity. We might get this intellectually, but the traveling from the intellect in the brain in the head down into the heart, down into the gut, is a long process for many of us. It's hard for us to grasp this on an intuitive level, on a heart level. We might get it intellectually, but I don't think we quite understand it unless we've had some kind of a mystical orientation or mystical experience with the sense of vastness of time. And if you see on the screen, like we have all of these eras that happen in Earth's history. And this is like right now at the top, we're in the Cenozoic. We're at the edge of the Cenozoic era. 1.6 million years ago. And it's really, really hard for us to grasp that length of time. Humanity, as we know it, that modern Homo sapiens only goes back about 40,000 years. And if we get into other forms of Homo sapiens that we've, excavated their skeletons, etc., you go back about 200,000 years. And we go back about 2 million years ago when uh, when our ancestors, our primate ancestors, somehow make this amazing journey out of the trees. They lived in trees and they go on to the savannah. And what do? What helps them to survive the savannah? Well, somehow evolution allows this incredible ability to stand upright on 2 feet. Right? This is an amazing event it's an amazing evolutionary event. We're one of few creatures on the planet today that can actually walk on 2 legs. Right? We have the 4 legs. We think of these arms, we think of these 2 things here as arms, but they're also legs. And we're celebrating being upright when we sit zazen. We're celebrating the ability to be upright. This is just, if we think about the long history or 2 million years, and here's the thing is that over a generation or 2 or 3 or 4, we're not going to witness any kind of change in our lifetime because evolution takes place on such an immense scale. We have to think in terms of millions of years to see change take place, evolutionary change. We have to think in terms of millions of years. But just look at this time scale. It goes from 1.6 million to 66 million years ago with the dinosaurs. And then it goes all the way down 3,800 million years ago. There was life, right? 3,800 million years ago, there was life on this planet. It wasn't life as we know it today, but there was life. There was life on this planet. So this is an introduction to what we call deep time, right? Or what has been labeled deep time. 6,000 years is just not long enough, right? We're used to, however, thinking in terms of about 6,000 years into the past. That's where about our history ends. And we don't much consider history. We think of it as science or biology or chemistry when we go past beyond that. But I want to invite us to think about this as our history. That we don't set. Here's the thing: is we separate ourselves out. We think, okay, there's human history, and then there's Earth history, and those two are 2 separate things. Well, in a sense, they are, but it's also our history. It's also part of our history. It's also part of our legacy, human legacy. And we're also not used to thinking in terms of that length of time into the future. 6 million years in the future, 20 million years into the future. We're used to thinking in terms of 5 years, 20 years, maybe if we're lucky, 7 generations. This is okay, but what if? What if we could start thinking more long term? All right, here's another view of our history, not Earth history, not universe history, but our history as human beings. It goes back. We can go back millions of years, like we just did on this planet, but we can also go back. If you look at this first thing where it says universe, eukaryotes are born some 1 billion years ago. And then you've got prokaryotes are this single cell organisms. Eukaryotes are multicellular organisms. We're multicellular organisms, right? And you see this red line here. Look at that red line. That's about 2.5 billion years ago. That's where the Earth existed some 4.4 billion years ago. This has got our solar system here. This is when the Earth comes out. It emerges from a supernova. Our life, the life of this solar system that we presently live in, that's about 2/3 out from the center of the Milky Way galaxy, was born from a supernova explosion. And just like a wave on the ocean, the wave expands, it goes out onto the sea, onto the land, and then it retracts, just like our breath expands. So take a breath in, it's expanding. Our lungs are expanding out into space, and then exhaling, we contract. In the same way, the wave expands onto the shoreline and then contracts. And in the same way, the sun expanded, explodes out into this interstellar space, expands out, and then it comes back, and in its wake, it leaves all of the planets in our solar system, including our Earth, that happens to be just the right distance away from the sun, not too hot, not too cold, spinning at just the right angle. And after 2 billion years, after almost 2 billion years of Earth coming into being, you have the emergence of single cellular organisms called prokaryotes, right? It takes another billion years or so before you get multicellular organisms. And then you start to, life complexifies through this time. Again, we're not used to thinking about life in this immense scale of time. But we've noticed there's changes taking place in species. Species are diversifying, all right? So here's a quote from Charles, was it Dawkins, his name? Our brains are built to deal with events on radically different timescales from those that characterize evolutionary change. And he says, we are equipped to appreciate processes that take seconds, minutes, years, or at most decades to complete. Right? Just think about your own, your own kind of relative time scale of things. What do you think in terms of? And I'm guessing that most of us, I mean, myself included, we're not thinking in terms of millions or billions of years. We're thinking in terms of seconds or minutes or years, maybe decades. Darwin, so this is Richard Dawkins, this is all a quote from Richard Dawkins. He says, Darwinism is a theory of processes so slow, that they take between thousands and millions of decades to complete. Not years, decades, thousands and millions of decades to complete. All right. And I don't know, I was thinking about what's the geography of the land in Omaha and around Nebraska and stuff, and maybe some of you can shed light on that for me. But here in Iowa, not too far from where I live, there is a state park called Ledges. It's in Boone, Iowa, which is the next city over. And we go there fairly, periodically. If you maybe once or twice a month, we'll get over there. But you can see here in this image the layers of rocks. And it's just amazing to see these different colors. You can see in some places there's petrified wood that is embedded in these rocks. But when you see those layers of rocks, we're looking at millions and millions of years sedimentary buildup. So here's from the University of Iowa website, states that Ledges appears in its present day form due to the advance and retreat of continental ice sheets during the Quaternary period, 2.6 million years ago, up until the present. So when we're viewing these layers of rock, we're looking at time. We're seeing time here, time in terms of millions of years. Between about 500,000 and 30,000 years ago, the central Iowa landscape evolved through several episodes of drainage and development and accompanying soil erosion. So this, just thinking about this again in terms of hundreds of thousands of years or tens of thousands of years. Why is our land shaped the way it is? And this again harkens back to the way that science sees the planet in terms of empirical observation through careful sensory experience, like using your eyes or the extensions of instruments like a telescope or a microscope. So I'm just wondering what are the local sites that are significant in the Omaha area geographically, and
Yes.
maybe you all can share a little bit about that. But here's the thing: is our present mythology, and by present I mean within the past 100 years, right? 100 years ago, or even 200 years ago, the, the many of our ancestors, our great grandparents, for example, probably had no time, or had not they had no time, probably had no interest in questioning the stories in the Bible like we do today. But we have this very small image of time, and the clock time often confuses us. It's when we are able to let go of clock time that we can start to begin to get a glimpse of these immense passages of time. But our present mythology, the book of Genesis, doesn't take into account, doesn't help us understand these vast amounts of time. And on the other side of the equation is that science often doesn't, I mean, it presents us with this information, but we don't know what to do with it. Because that's what mythology's role is to kind of instruct us, like, well, how do we live our life based on this? Right? We desire to know what this means for us. How is it relevant? How does it help us to feel a sense of belonging? So there are some teachings that I've found just mind-blowing and on par with some of these scientific discoveries. And they have the added, because it's coming from within a religious tradition, it has the added benefit of helping us see also our sense of place, also see our sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. So I wanted to share some verses from the Avatamsaka Sutra. This is the Avatamsaka Sutra is absolutely my favorite sutra, and we have a few copies of it, I believe, in the library upstairs if you want to check it out. But it's just a tome. It's like 1,500 pages long, and it has repeated it repeats some of the same things again and again, but you just keep getting it from a different angle. And of course, at the time of the writing down of the Avatamsaka Sutra, some probably 2,000 years ago, these the empirical data wasn't present then, right? The discoveries that we're finding just within the past 300-400 years weren't at our disposal, weren't at the disposal of the writers of the Avatamsaka Sutra. So this is a case where mystical experience is informing knowledge, or intuitive awareness is informing knowledge. But there's this repeated theme of the entire universe being within an atom, right? The spiritual power, this is from one of the verses. The spiritual power of all Buddhas shows many lands in an atom. Wow. I mean, just pause to take that in. The spiritual power. Where's the Buddha's power? Well, you can find the Buddha's power in an atom. If that doesn't shake us, I don't know what will. I mean, we're constantly touching atoms and moving atoms, and all of this. We talk about the various forms. How do we do things in a Zen center? What do? We place our palms together. How many atoms are in our hands? Just putting our palms together. This motion of gasho, to bring the palms together. It's not a rule. We're not doing it to learn a rule, and it's not about right or wrong. We're doing it to enter into an atom. Right? It sounds so strange when I say it. If we're not in our right brain thinking, it's not going to make sense when I say, by placing our palms together, we're entering into the Buddha's power, or we're entering into enlightenment, or we're entering into an atom. Right? That's not what I just said is not going to make any sense if we're still caught in left brain thinking. We got to move over to the right brain, the creative side of our brain, not the logical side. Right? Um, of various kinds, all clearly seen like reflections, they have no true reality. Again, it's just like you can pause here. What does it mean to have no true reality? Does it mean that if I step in front of a bus, I'm not going to get hit? No, clearly not. Right? But what does it mean to have no true? When we put our palms together, all Buddhas are coming together. All the Buddhas are coming together. Right? How many atoms are in your fingertips? They're pressing together like this. Here's another one. Some lands last an eon. Right? Some lands last an eon. Some exist for 10 eons. How long is an eon? An eon is vast. Another translation, I'm guessing this is a translation of the word kalpa. And in Buddhist thinking, kalpa is the amount of time that it takes if you had a huge, immense boulder. It's the amount of time it would take for an angel with the softest of wings to come out of heaven and fly down and sweep its soft wings against the boulder, and then go back up into heaven. And it does that only once every 100 years. And so an eon is the amount of time it would take for that boulder to become dust. Given that's the only thing that happens to it. It's relatively stable otherwise. The only thing that affects it is this angel coming down out of heaven every 100 years. It sweeps its soft wings against the boulder, and then goes back up to heaven. Right? The amount of time it would take for that boulder to become dust. That's an eon. Some lands last an eon, some exist for 10 eons, or more, or for more eons than atoms in 100,000 lands. Get your minds wrapped around that. More eons than atoms in 100,000. Think about the size of 100,000 lands, and then think about the number of atoms in those lands. More eons than atoms in 100,000 lands. Here's another one. In each Buddha field, a Buddha appears in the world, spending billions of years, expounding unexcelled truths. Woo! What does it mean that a Buddha spends billions of years in this world? Yesterday, we were observing the art of a Japanese. I can't remember his name right now, and I don't have the book at my fingertips. But Paula Arai, the Buddhist scholar, she teaches down in Louisiana, and she's done a lot of wonderful books and research in Soto Zen. And this one book is actually about a Japanese science teacher who's also a devout Buddhist and an artist. And some of the artwork, the book's called Painting Enlightenment. And he draws all of these connections between these discoveries of science, and he draws the Heart Sutra as in a way to explain them. For example, the Heart Sutra and the DNA, a strand of DNA, right, is constructed with the Chinese characters from the Heart Sutra, and he does this with the galaxies as well. So this is what I think our time is sorely thirsting for, is a mythology that also has an ethic, that has a religious base or a mythological base. We need, I don't care where it comes from, but we desperately need this mythology that connects with our empirical data, or the science of our time, because it gives us a sense of who we are and where we are and what we're about. Okay, so the need to think in terms of deep time, and I'll just share one. Well, you know what? I think I'll end there. I think I'll end there. Give you guys a chance to reflect or comment or. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions, comments, thoughts that come up about that? Mike?
So speaking of the local geographic or geological places of interest, the Loess Hills, which are mostly in Iowa, across the river, are very interesting because it's a very specific type of sand that only happens when the wind blows over the Missouri River. I think there's one other place in China that this occurs. Loess Hills are very unique, and you can see where they've cut into it, or they've like quarried it. The sand just stacks vertically, and there's some roads you can drive through. And instead of going over the very steep hills, they just cut right through them. There's like 50-foot tall sidewalls. You can see it's just sand all the way down. So that's a very interesting place.
What is it called?
The Loess Hills, which are
The Loess.
Loess. Loess.
Yeah.
Loess.
Loess. The Loess Hills. Okay, I'm gonna have to look that up. Thank you.
They go from like South Dakota all the way down to Missouri in some places. I think
Okay.
and a little farther south of Omaha, but very cool.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
I'll check them out. Thank you. Thank you.
I just like to add that if you go to Neil Woods, which is a part of Fontenelle Forest, it runs along the Missouri River. It's just north of Omaha, a little bit past the airport. It's called Neil Woods, Neale. You get a really good view of the Loess Hills. Probably one of the best views of the Loess Hills up there. It's a park that you can go visit.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna get my pen and write these things down. I'll forget them.
Do you know what it is?
So Loess Hills and the Neil Woods.
Neil Woods, yep.
All right. That's great. Sounds like a good outing. We can have a sashimi there, maybe. Yeah, I see somebody.
Where's farm? You have a good view of it. It's in the Loess Hills, yeah. Yeah. We should have a field trip.
Yeah.
And speaking of Tara, it was interesting that when we had our Dharma book club on, it was Musong, a book about the Heart Sutra, which that book in particular does a lot of tying in with, new quantum science and that sort of thing.
Oh, nice. Great.
Buddhist thought in that, and especially the Heart Sutra. But interestingly, she also brought in a book of this art that you just talked about.
Oh, really? By Paula Arai?
With enlightenment. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Just coincidentally, she brought the book in?
Mm-hmm.
Just coincidentally, you brought the book in?
Well, she brought it in
we
because
were studying the Heart Sutra, and it really is sort of a amazing. You get the feel of enlightenment through the way that he paints the sutra. Like Daishin was saying, like it's DNA strands, it's lightning, and he really, because he was a scientist before he was a practitioner, you really get the sense of those two worlds melding together when you see his work.
It's amazing. Do you have the book at hand?
No, I mean, I can bring it. It's at home.
Yeah. Yeah, you could also, yeah, definitely. Well, I would definitely suggest you could find images online too of some of his work, um, and view them. Let me see if I can, actually, I'll see if I can find any of them and put them up here. What is it? Painting Enlightenment. There. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay. There it is. Yeah. Okay. Well, here's the cover of the book anyway. You can see that. So here's the cover of the book, Paula Arise there. But this is a waterfall, and you see a little figure here at the foot of the waterfall, and then the Heart Sutra going down into the water, going into the Heart Sutra going down into the water. Just beautiful. There's some others here. Let me see. He does one of the Big Bang that's just incredible. Here's one. Oops. Here's one of geese, geese, and then the waves themselves are done in the shape of the hearts, are done with the Heart Sutra. So that's an example of that. Oh, here's the DNA one. Right, all those Heart Sutra, all the Chinese characters just kind of going around like that, just beautiful. And the commentary also is just wonderful on it as well. So.
I only have one thing that came up for me when you were talking about deep time, and it just made it, to me, it just like reminded me of how unaccustomed we are to thinking about deep time. And I don't even remember what I was listening to. It was a podcast, and but they were talking about deep time, and he was talking about like all of these different, epochs, and I think he was a geologist, and a cosmologist was there. But anyway, they were talking about like millions and millions of years ago, when what was happening on the Earth when all of this was taking place. And he was like, but when you talk about it, deep time, there's also obviously a space component. And so when this thing happened millions and millions of years ago, we were also in a completely different place in the universe, because our little solar system circles the black hole in our galaxy. Mm-hmm. So I was just like, well, of course, but oh my God, that's totally true. And so, yeah, just thinking about time and space together in that way, you're just like, oh, okay. Yeah.
And yet we get too impatient if it takes more than 3 seconds for an internet
page to load. Well, of course, yeah.
Well, yeah, and just the other day I was reading an article about there's a lot of scientists now who are beginning to revolve around the idea that both space and time are complete illusions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really?
Yeah. So, which goes back to the Avatam or whatever, the sutra. Yeah.
Yeah, there's Ram Dass with Buddha time, which is the only time that there is. Right here.
As I think about that, I mean, one thing that struck me is like, okay, so the universe is infinite. That means our world is the size of an atom. With that infinite space, it's got to be true. And also, I think about, we talk about purpose, and I think about the scale of purpose. That something a billion years ago nurtured life so that we could be here now. And that somehow we are nurturing life so a billion years from now, they'll also be here. So I like the beauty of Buddhism, that it brings in that scale of thought into everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting that the difference in, that Buddhism does really draw you in to think about those huge scales of time and space. And, I've known many Christians closely who fully accept science and, are open to it. But then I also have Christians in my family that take this hyper literal view. And whenever I hear their thoughts about that, I just keep thinking, why would you want to make your God so small?
Right.
Just making this, mystery so small. It's just
Mm.
strange.
Well, I read that when like astronomers talk in astronomical units and they start to use, to speed of light. I mean, you think, 4.6 light years away is the closest star, and that doesn't sound that far. And then you realize that a light year is 1,000,000,000,000 years, and then you just start going, oh my God. And then they've asked, I think, cosmologists, how do you adjust to these large numbers? How do you comprehend the large numbers? And they still can't, because they're human beings. It's so big, and they can speak in all those exponents and everything and communicate about it, but to comprehend it, it's beyond our comprehension.
Mm.
An ant,
Congress in dollars.
yeah, there you go. Exactly, exactly. It's like an ant trying to understand the solar system. You just can't. You don't have the ability.
Yeah. Benji.
Daishin, thank you so much for the history lesson. And everybody else I'm a huge fan of Richard Dawkins. I've read a couple of his books, and one was The Ancestor's Tale, and it goes in reverse chronological order from the single cell organism all the way back to hominids and Homo sapiens. It was very interesting. I learned a lot in that. But and thanks for what I'm trying to do, I suppose, is try to find out why we're so compelled with stories. Is there a reason? Is there some sort of evolutionary context to that?
Mm.
Joseph Campbell.
You've all
Also,
Power of
the
Myth.
Storytelling Animal, is that what he wrote?
No, I
There's a
don't.
book called The Storytelling Animal by an anthropologist, and that one. Anyway, go.
Joseph Campbell's a good recommendation.
Joseph
The Power of
Campbell.
Myth is
Yeah.
The
great.
Power of
Okay.
We're gonna write all this down.
Yeah, I'm writing it
I
down.
might have it at home.
But you could also find videos like YouTube of Joseph Campbell. I think he's a great resource, though, for sure.
I just wanted to say, I'm glad you brought up Joseph Campbell, because he's someone that I admire his writing very much. And I think he really although I just think a lot of people missed it. He wrote very extensively, and I think he really tried to kind of formulate a perennial thought running through all the different ages, through the different religions, different systems of philosophy. But really what I just wanted to say, guys, that, there's a lot of talking and a lot of thinking among human beings. And I don't think that's where it's at. I visited Death Valley around this time a year ago, and it was the most transcendental experience I've ever had in my life. I got out in this vast expanse. I was so small, the sky was so big, the land was so big, and it was so powerful, and it was there before me, and it'll be there after I go, that I thought, this is the only religion I need. It's the religion of awe.
Mm.
I think the scientists are getting it. We're so obsessed about trying to quantify and qualify and understand and write it. That's not it. Where it's at is in the felt experience of being alive, I think. But we live in a culture that's a grinding wheel of greed and lies, and you have to work to make money to survive. And I want to live the other life, and I'm trying to find a way out of the current one to get to that, but I don't know if it'll happen or not. But I think the people of the past, they were a lot closer to it than we are. And I think, our brains have something to do with that. I suppose we're endlessly curious, which isn't all bad, but it's led us down some bad roads. So, yeah, like I said, whenever I feel like this life's not worth living, I just go back to what I felt when I was out in the desert.
Mm.
It was very, very powerful, and I want more of it. And I've been trying to find a way to cultivate it within myself. I haven't been able to find that way yet. So.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. That's really powerful. The limitations of words and language, and come up against that, and and to return back to that experience that you had. That's important. Keep keep at it. Keep studying. Keep learning. Yeah.
Anyone else have some thoughts or comments?
Back to the geography lessons, if you've still got your pen and paper, I know that some people think civilization ends with Westo, but there are other places in Nebraska as well. And one of the most amazing is the sandhill crane migration, which happens in central Nebraska, and people come from all over the world to
Wow.
experience it, and it's free, the best part. And it comes from, it's like an hourglass where they migrate to a very small space in central Nebraska along the Platte River and then expand out again. And they have really long necks with really long windpipes, so the sound that they make is unlike any other, and it is quite spectacular.
Thank you for that. I'm just charging up. My computer's about to die here. Yeah, thank you for that. The Sandhill crane migration. That sounds like an amazing. When does that? What time of year does that happen? Spring? Fall?
Early spring.
Early spring.
March.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of March, but it, depending on the weather, second week in March maybe is the most spectacular.
Mm.
Okay, well, we have a annual meeting and a board meeting to get to, so we can wrap this up. And I think about 10 minutes from now, we'll start the annual meeting. We'll probably just set up a table in here. And we'll just keep the Zoom channel open for that as well. And thank you again.
Thank you.
For doing the talk. We'll have-
Hey, thank you guys. Thanks, Chris and Max online, and everybody at Nebraska Zen Center. Thank you so much. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
We'll have chant.
Closing chant, call and response. The many beings are numberless, vowing to carry them across.
The beings are numberless, vowing to carry them across.
Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, vowing to cut off the mind road.
Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, vowing to cut off the mind road.
Dharma gates are countless, vowing to wake to them all.
Dharma gates are countless, vowing to wake to them all.
Buddha's way is all embracing, vowing to follow through.
Buddha's way is all embracing, vowing to follow through. Thank you all. We'll put our cushions back in place. The one in the middle can be put back in the corner, and then we'll bow.
Hey, Chris, what is your
Yeah.
last
Birdsall, Birdsall.
I remember you. Okay, thank you. I'm taking
Yeah, I
it.
wanted to come in this morning, but just couldn't make the drive. So
Understood.
yeah.
Nice to meet you, Chris.
Bye.